Clara stood in the center of the small wooden church, feeling as though the walls were closing in on her from every direction. She was only 18, and though she had known since childhood that her family struggled with debts and failing crops, she had never imagined that her own future would become the price of survival. Yet here she was wearing a simple white dress that felt more like a rope than a gown, while her trembling hands clutched a bouquet she did not remember choosing. Her mother adjusted the veil with a shaky tenderness that only deepened Clara's dread, for it reminded her that this decision had been born out of desperation, not cruelty. Her father did not meet her eyes, for the guilt had hollowed him long before this day arrived. At the front of the church waited Talon Greyhawk, the man she was to marry. He was known across the territory as a wealthy Apache rancher, a man with acres of land and herds counted by the hundreds. His presence alone carried a quiet authority built not by arrogance, but by strength and discipline shaped through years of hard work. Still, Clara had never spoken more than 5 words to him before this day, and none of those had offered any comfort now. He stood tall with a solemn expression carved from a life far older than his years, and though he did not look unkind, he was still a stranger. And young as she was, the idea of sharing a life with a stranger terrified her beyond measure. The ceremony passed in a haze. Clara barely heard the vows, and her own voice trembled so faintly she wondered if anyone understood her answer. When Talon placed the ring on her finger, his touch was steady, but she felt a shiver race up her arm. Not from him, but from the weight of everything binding her to him now. When it was over, the church filled with applause that felt wrong to her ears, as if celebrating the closing of a door she had hoped would stay open just a little longer. The ride to Talon's ranch stretched endlessly across the wide plains. Clara kept her gaze on her hands, trying not to think of the night that waited ahead. She knew what happened between husband and wife, though only in the vaguest way taught by hushed warnings and half-spoken fears. Her stomach twisted with every mile passing beneath the horse-drawn wagon. Talon sat beside her, silent but not uncaring. He glanced at her occasionally as if wanting to speak, yet choosing patience instead. His restraint confused her, for she had expected a man rich and powerful to be demanding or stern, but instead he allowed the silence to exist without pressure. When they reached the ranch, the house rose huge and shadowed against the fading sky. Warm lamplight glowed in the windows, and the scent of fresh bread drifted from the kitchen. It should have felt welcoming, but Clara felt her throat close the moment she stepped inside. This was her home now, her life, her future. The room prepared for their wedding night was softly lit and neatly arranged, and an untouched quilt lay across the bed like an invitation she did not know how to accept. Her heartbeat pounded so loud she could barely breathe. Tears began to fill her eyes before she could stop them, and within moments she found herself crying in small shaking sobs that she tried desperately to silence. Talon entered the room quietly, and the moment he saw her, his expression changed from unreadable calm to something far gentler. He approached slowly, as though approaching a frightened bird. Instead of reaching for her, he knelt beside her seat and spoke in a low, steady voice that held no anger and no demand. He told her that her fear was nothing to be ashamed of, and that he would never touch her without her trust. He told her that tonight she would sleep in peace, not worry. He offered her his own room and took a blanket to sleep outside beneath the stars. As he stepped away, Clara felt her tears shift from fear into confusion and a small, unfamiliar thread of hope. Talon rose before sunrise, his breath soft in the cool morning air as he folded the blanket he had used outdoors. The sky glowed with pale streaks of gold stretching over the ranch, as if the land itself welcomed the day with quiet strength. He stood for a long moment, listening to the distant calls of horses and feeling the familiar steadiness settle through him. He had married a young woman who trembled at the sight of him, and the weight of that truth rested heavily on his chest. He was not angry with her. If anything, he was angry at the circumstances that had pushed her into a life she had not chosen. He understood too well that fear leaves marks deeper than scars. Inside the house, Clara woke slowly, her eyes puffy from the tears she had tried to hide the night before. She sat up confused for a moment before remembering that she was in Talon's room, a room he had given to her without hesitation. The simple act had shaken her more than anything else. She had expected demands, expectations, assumptions. But Talon had offered distance and safety instead. She rose from the bed, her feet cold against the wooden floor as she approached the small window. Outside, she saw him walking toward the barns with a calm, steady stride. He had slept outside because of her fear. The thought twisted her heart in ways she did not understand. Clara dressed slowly in the skirt and blouse folded neatly on the dresser. She smoothed her hair and breathed deeply, trying to steady her trembling hands. She did not know how to face him. Would he resent her for crying? Would he think her childish? Would he regret marrying her at all? These questions churned inside her like a river in spring flood. Still, she forced her feet toward the kitchen, drawn by the scent of warm bread and wood smoke. Talon entered moments later, wiping his hands on a cloth after tending the horses. He stopped in the doorway when he saw her standing stiffly near the table. Their eyes met for a fraction of a heartbeat, and Clara felt as though time had paused around them. He gave her a gentle nod as if to tell her that there was no tension here, no unspoken judgment waiting to fall upon her shoulders. She returned the nod, though her voice stayed trapped deep within her chest. Breakfast was quiet, though not uncomfortable. Talon spoke first, his tone soft and careful. He told her she did not owe him anything, not her fear, not her readiness, not her trust. He said he would earn all of that in time, not claim it through marriage vows or family bargains. His words startled her more than raised voices ever had. She had never heard a man speak with such patience. Most spoke with expectation or authority, but Talon spoke as if he wanted her comfort more than his own desires. Clara finally managed a few words. She apologized for crying, for being frightened, for not knowing how to be a proper wife. Her voice shook through every sentence, and her hands tightened in her lap. Talon shook his head and told her that she owed no apology for her feelings. Fear does not make a person weak, he said. It makes them honest. And he would rather have a wife who spoke truth than one who pretended to be brave when she was hurting inside. The gentleness in his voice softened something tight inside her. For the first time since the wedding, she felt her lungs fill completely, as though she had been holding her breath for hours. Talon did not step closer, did not reach for her, did not press her with expectation. He simply rose to clean his plate and said she was welcome to explore the ranch if she wished. He offered to show her the land later if she felt ready. Clara watched him leave the kitchen, his footsteps steady, his shoulders relaxed. She did not know what to make of a man who had power, wealth, and strength, yet chose restraint over force. She had spent one night as his wife, and instead of fear deepening, she felt something shift inside her like a small stone rolling free from a tight place. She did not know it yet, but this patient quiet morning was the first thread in a bond that would soon reshape both of their hearts. The first full morning of Clara's new life rose with a soft and gentle glow spreading across the vast Greyhawk Ranch. The sun lifted slowly behind the distant hills, casting long beams of gold over the fields and fences. Clara stepped outside onto the porch, her hands folded tightly together as she breathed the cool morning air. She felt the weight of the night behind her, yet something inside her rested differently than before. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer pressed against her chest quite as sharply. The quiet strength of sunrise wrapped around her like a new beginning. Below the porch, Talon worked with the horses, moving with practiced ease through the early chores. His motions were smooth and calm, as if he and the land were part of the same rhythm. Clara watched him from the shadows near the doorway, unsure if she should approach him or remain where she was. He did not see her at first. He was focused on the chestnut gelding before him, brushing its coat with even patient strokes. The horse responded to his touch with a soft twitch of its ears, a visible sign of trust. That small shared moment between man and animal stirred something in Clara. She had heard plenty of harsh stories about powerful men, yet here was her husband showing gentleness to a creature that could not even speak his name. When Talon finally turned and noticed her on the porch, he paused. His eyes softened with a quiet warmth, but he did not call to her or make her come closer. Instead, he offered a simple nod, a wordless gesture that said he was glad she was awake, and that she was free to choose her own pace. Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest, gratitude mixed with nervousness. She offered a small nod in return. She stepped down one stair, then hesitated, unsure if she was welcome among the animals. Talon gestured toward her again, this time with his hand open, relaxed and inviting, not demanding. She drew in a slow breath and stepped down the final steps until her boots touched the cool earth. The ranch stretched wide before her, with barns, corrals, rolling grassland, and far-off ridges that glowed warm under the rising sun. It was nothing like her childhood home, which had always felt too small, too cramped, too close to the sound of worry. Here everything breathed wide and free and full of possibility. Talon stood near, the brown mare now brushing her mane with slow strokes. Clara stopped a little distance away, trying not to intrude. He glanced at her and spoke gently, saying the mare was named Serafina and that she was one of the calmest horses on the ranch. He invited Clara to step closer, offering to show her how the horse liked to be greeted. Clara hesitated, her heart fluttering at the idea of touching such a large animal, but she felt something urging her forward. Maybe it was the open sky, or the warming sun, or the quiet steadiness in Talon's eyes. She approached Serafina slowly, and Talon guided her hand, but without touching her, only pointing, showing her where to place her palm. Clara lifted her hand and set it lightly on the mare's warm shoulder. Serafina let out a slow breath, leaning slightly into the contact. Clara felt a sudden rush of awe ripple through her. This creature accepted her without question. It was the first moment she had felt needed or welcomed since the wedding. Talon watched her with the faintest hint of a smile. Not pride and not triumph, but something softer. Something that looked like respect. He told her she had a gentle way that horses sensed and appreciated. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the unfamiliar sensation of being praised without expectation. As the sun climbed higher, Clara felt the tension inside her begin to loosen. Standing there beside the horse with Talon nearby, she did not feel quite as frightened as before. The world looked a little brighter, and her place within it a little less uncertain. She turned toward Talon, and for the first time she managed a small, true smile. It was slight and timid, yet it changed everything. Talon's eyes warmed in a way she had not seen before, as though her smile had reached him more deeply than any words could. In that single sunrise moment, she saw more than a husband. She saw a man who carried strength without cruelty and power without force. And though she did not fully understand it yet, she felt the beginning of trust settling quietly inside her, like the first soft light of dawn. The breakfast room smelled faintly of fresh bread and brewed coffee, and Clara sat at the small table, fidgeting with the edge of her napkin, her hands trembling as if they remembered the night before. Talon had entered with calm, quiet steps, carrying a plate for himself and setting it gently on the table. He had greeted her with nothing more than a nod and a faint smile, the kind that held no expectation and no judgment. Clara felt a flutter in her chest, a mix of nervousness and relief. She had expected anger or stern words, perhaps even impatience, yet here he was simply present, allowing her space to exist without pressure. They began to eat in silence, the only sounds the clinking of silverware against plates and the occasional creak of floorboards beneath shifting weight. Clara glanced at Talon from the corner of her eye, noting the steady way he chewed the toast and sipped the coffee. He looked almost fragile in the morning light, his broad shoulders relaxed and his dark eyes calm, but there was a quiet intensity. There, too, an unspoken command that spoke of years of hard work and careful choices. Clara felt small in comparison, yet strangely comforted. She realized that despite the size of the ranch and the wealth he possessed, this man did not seem interested in asserting dominance over her. Instead, he seemed content to let her find her own place in the space they now shared. At last, Talon spoke, his voice low and careful, carrying no hint of criticism. He told her that she did not owe him trust immediately, that she did not have to pretend bravery she did not feel. He said he would earn her confidence in time, not through demands or obligations, but by patience and honesty. His words struck Clara deeply, for she had never met a man willing to wait for her to catch up to circumstance. Most people she had known had pressed expectations on her day after day, forcing smiles where fear and uncertainty lived. Talon's patience was almost shocking, yet it drew her toward him with invisible threads she could not name. Clara found herself whispering an apology, though she did not quite understand why. She spoke of the tears she had shed the night before, of her fear of the unknown, and her worry that she would disappoint him. Talon shook his head lightly, saying that she had no reason to apologize, that fear was a natural response to upheaval and change. He told her that he valued honesty far more than the performance of courage, and that in his house honesty would always find welcome. The simplicity of his statement settled something deep within Clara. She felt her chest unclench, and the tight knot of dread loosened slightly, as if a fresh breeze had swept through a long dark tunnel. After breakfast, Talon offered her the choice to explore the ranch if she wished. He said she could wander the fields, visit the barns, or simply stay inside the house, whatever felt right for her. Clara hesitated a moment, overwhelmed by the vastness of the land, but something inside urged her forward. She nodded, and Talon stood to his feet, offering her a faint smile, the kind that seemed to say he would wait as long as necessary. She followed him slowly across the porch and down the worn steps, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The morning sun warmed her back, and the wind carried a hint of wild grass and horses. She felt tiny, yet somehow part of a world bigger than herself. As they walked, Talon explained small details about the land, pointing out hidden streams and the best spots to see sunrise and sunset. He spoke softly yet confidently, his words not commanding but guiding. Clara listened carefully, absorbing every detail and noticing how calm and steady he remained, even as he spoke of work and responsibility. She realized that this man was patient, not because he lacked desire or ambition, but because he understood the value of trust and the power of respect. The thought sank into her heart, slowly planting seeds of curiosity and hope. Perhaps this stranger who had become her husband could one day be a friend, perhaps even a protector of her heart rather than just a keeper of her obligations. In that quiet morning, Clara felt the first fragile threads of connection stretching tentatively between them, threads that would take time to strengthen, yet promised the possibility of something far greater than fear alone. Later that morning, Talon led Clara to the stables where the horses were waiting, their coats gleaming in the bright sun. The smell of hay and leather filled the air, and Clara felt her heart flutter with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had ridden horses before, but never on land this vast and wild, nor under the watchful eyes of a man who carried both strength and quiet authority. Talon approached her with a calm smile and offered the reins of a gentle Mari named Serafina. He told her that the horse was well trained and would respond to her touch if she stayed relaxed and confident. Clara nodded, trying to absorb his words and not allow her nerves to spill over. Talon mounted his own horse with ease, moving with a grace that spoke of years spent riding the open plains. He turned back and offered her a hand, steady and patient. Clara hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his and letting him guide her onto the saddle. She felt the solid warmth of his hand against hers and the steady weight of his presence reassuring, yet not controlling. When she settled into the saddle, she realized that the world looked completely different from this height. The ranch stretched endlessly before her, rolling hills and hidden valleys bathed in sunlight and shadow. The wind teased her hair and the horses shifted beneath them, their movements powerful yet smooth. They began riding slowly across the fields, Talon staying just beside her, allowing her space while keeping a watchful eye. Clara felt her chest loosen and a thrill of freedom run through her as the horses moved in unison. For the first time since the wedding, she felt less like a captive and more like a participant in this new life. The quiet of the morning wrapped around them, the soft sounds of hooves on grass and distant birdsong creating a rhythm that calmed her racing thoughts. Talon spoke little, letting the experience itself teach her confidence. When he did speak, his words were gentle reminders to relax, to trust Serafina, and to feel the movement of the horse beneath her legs. As they rode further, Clara began to notice small details she had overlooked from the porch and the windows. The streams glinting in the sunlight, the way the trees bent slightly with the wind, and the distant hills that rose like silent guardians of the land. Talon pointed out landmarks and told stories of moments spent on the ranch long before she arrived. Each story carried his voice, calm and steady, filled with pride yet never arrogance. Clara listened closely, finding herself laughing quietly at some of the smaller tales and marveling at his skill and knowledge. She began to see him not only as a powerful man, but as someone who loved the land and cared deeply for every creature upon it. At a ridge overlooking the valley, Talon stopped and allowed Clara to rest. The horses shifted beneath them, and she reached to smooth Serafina's mane, noticing how calm the animal remained beside her. Talon stayed near her, speaking softly about the land, the ranch, and the responsibilities he bore. Clara realized that this ride was more than a simple introduction to the horses and the fields. It was an offering of trust, a way to share a part of his world without demand or expectation. She felt herself relaxing completely. For the first time in days, the tension of the wedding night and the fear of the unknown melting into a sense of possibility. As the sun climbed higher, the wind carrying the sense of wild grass and earth, Clara turned to Talon and met his gaze. There was no judgment there, only patience and steady strength. She felt an unexpected warmth in her chest, a small spark of connection forming between them. This first ride together had done more than introduce her to the ranch. It had shown her that she could move beside him, not under him, not against him, but alongside him. And in that quiet moment, as the horses grazed and the sun painted gold across the fields, Clara felt the faintest hint of hope that perhaps she could belong hereafter. All the afternoon sky darkened, with sudden swiftness casting shadows over the ranch as clouds gathered heavy and low. Clara felt a ripple of unease at the sight, for she had never experienced storms on this wide open land. The wind picked up, tugging at her skirt and teasing strands of hair across her face as Talon guided the horses toward an old cabin perched on a ridge. The cabin was small and sturdy, with a sloping roof and wide porch that had weathered many storms over the years. Talon led her inside and secured the horses under the small covered area while the first fat drops of rain began to fall. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke from the hearth, and Clara felt a chill run down her spine. Inside the cabin, the space was simple yet warm. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light across rough wooden walls. Talon gestured for Clara to sit on a bench near the fire while he attended to the horses outside one last time. She watched him move with ease and grace, noting the way his strong hands worked gently yet efficiently. When he returned, she could see the rain soaking his sleeves, the dark hair at his temples clinging slightly to his forehead. He smiled faintly, a smile that did not demand anything from her yet carried reassurance. Clara realized she had never seen a man look so natural in the midst of power and responsibility, yet so capable of gentleness. They sat across from one another, the fire warming their faces and the storm thrumming a steady rhythm against the cabin roof. The silence between them felt heavier than any words she could imagine, but Clara knew she needed to speak. The tightness in her chest pressed her forward, and finally she admitted the truth. She spoke of fear of men, fear of being taken for granted, and fear of losing herself in a life she did not choose. Her voice shook, yet Talon did not interrupt, nor did he offer immediate solutions. He listened. He watched. He acknowledged her words with small nods and steady eyes that told her she was being heard. Talon did not shy away from the weight of her confession. His jaw tightened slightly, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, but his tone remained calm. He admitted that he had seen fear many times before in people who came under his authority, but he had rarely encountered honesty so raw, so unguarded. He told Clara that her words mattered, that they revealed a courage hidden beneath her trembling exterior. The honesty of her voice reached him deeper than she could have imagined, stirring a sense of protectiveness, not born from obligation but from genuine care. The storm raged on. Outside, lightning flickering across the horizon and thunder rolling through the hills, yet inside the cabin a fragile connection formed. Clara felt the first stirrings of trust she had allowed herself in days, as she realized that Talon would not force her to endure what she could not bear. He promised that the future would be built slowly with respect, patience, and understanding, that she could choose the pace at which she walked beside him. The offer of control over her own life within the fastened marriage was more profound than any material wealth he possessed, and it struck her with quiet intensity. As evening fell, the rain softened to a gentle drizzle and the firelight flickered across their faces. Talon spoke again in a voice soft yet firm, telling her that fear was natural, but it did not define her. That honesty and trust could exist even in moments of uncertainty, and that she need not hide from him any longer. Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief and gratitude that left her momentarily breathless. She realized that this small cabin on the ridge had become a sanctuary not only from the storm, but from the weight of doubt and expectation she had carried for so long. By the time the sky cleared and the last streaks of lightning faded, Clara felt something shift inside her. She had spoken her truth, and he had heard it without judgment. For the first time since the wedding, she felt a spark of confidence that perhaps this life could be navigated alongside Talon rather than beneath him. The storm outside had passed, but inside a deeper quiet had settled. It was a quiet that promised beginnings, a fragile foundation of trust, and the first glimmer of something neither of them had expected, yet both silently acknowledged as real. The night passed slowly, leaving behind a quiet calm as the first rays of sunlight stretched over the Greyhawk Ranch. Clara awoke in the small cabin, feeling the warmth of the fire's dying embers and the soft scent of rain on wood and earth. She rose carefully from the simple cot and stepped to the doorway, where the light spilled across the floor, casting long shadows that danced in the soft morning breeze. Outside, the world seemed washed clean, as if the storm had not only swept through the land, but had cleared a path. Inside her own chest, she felt the tension of the previous days loosen slightly as the sun warmed her shoulders and the wind carried the scent of wet grass and distant pine. Talon appeared at the edge of the cabin, his figure strong and tall against the horizon. He had already tended to the horses and the stable, his clothes still damp in places from the rain, but his movements were calm and steady, and the warmth of his presence carried reassurance. Clara watched him silently, noticing the way he paused to survey the land, as if ensuring everything was in order. When he finally turned toward her, his dark eyes met hers, holding no demand, no expectation, only steady focus and quiet strength. She felt a small flutter in her chest, a mixture of nervousness and anticipation as he approached slowly, keeping a respectful distance, he stopped a few steps away and spoke softly, his voice carrying over the morning breeze. He told her that she had been brave in sharing her fears, that she had faced the storm both outside and within herself, and that she need not fear the days ahead. He said that he would never force her to do anything she was not ready for, that her trust would be earned and never demanded, and that her comfort mattered above all else. Clara felt her eyes widen slightly as his words reached her deeper than any promises she had ever heard. The calm authority in his tone left no doubt that he meant every word, that he intended to honor her heart with patience and care. Talon moved a fraction closer and lowered his voice a notch so that only she could hear. He whispered that she would never have to fear the nights with him, that he would wait until she felt safe, that he would respect her boundaries, even as he hoped to earn her trust. He said that the sunrise brought new beginnings, and that today they would start fresh, not as strangers forced together, but as two people discovering one another with care. The sincerity in his voice shook Clara more than the most tender gestures she had ever imagined. She felt a lump rise in her throat, a mixture of relief and gratitude, and a small spark of hope she had thought impossible just days before. The air between them seemed to hold its own breath as they watched the sun climb higher over the ridge, illuminating fields and fences and the distant hills that stretched endlessly into the horizon. Talon extended a hand toward her, not to pull her forward, but to offer support and guidance. Clara reached for it tentatively and felt the strength of his grip without pressure, the warmth of his hand without force. She realized that this simple gesture held more meaning than any grand ceremony or vow spoken under the weight of expectation. It was a promise not only of protection but of partnership. As they stood side by side watching the sunlight spread across the ranch, Clara felt the first true stirrings of trust bloom within her. The storm had passed, and in its wake had left a fadlust, quiet space where hope could grow, where connection could be nurtured, and where she could begin to see Talon not merely as her husband by obligation, but as a man who might become a companion and guardian of her heart. She realized that in the golden light of sunrise she was no longer simply the frightened bride from the night before. She was a young woman standing beside a man who had chosen to meet her with patience and respect, and in that choice she felt a fragile yet powerful sense of belonging. The sun climbed fully over the hills, casting long shadows across the fields and illuminating the first tentative smiles exchanged between them. It was a beginning born not from ceremony or expectation, but from understanding, trust, and the quiet courage of a shared heart. Talon had made his promise, and Clara felt for the first time that she might indeed walk beside him, not in fear, but in hope. The ranch seemed to hold its breath as Clara followed Talon back toward the main house. The morning air was crisp, and the scent of wet grass and earth lingered from the storm, the sky above a soft pale blue with streaks of white clouds drifting lazily. Clara walked slowly beside him, her heart still fluttering from the promises of sunrise and the warmth of his steady presence. She realized that for the first time she did not feel entirely trapped by fear or obligation. Each step she took beside him carried a tentative confidence, a small shift in her own perception of what it meant to belong. They reached the barn where the stable hands were already at work tending to the animals and organizing equipment. Talon moved with practiced ease, guiding Clara through the space, pointing out the horses and explaining their habits and personalities. She listened closely, absorbing every detail and watching how he interacted with the staff, his tone firm yet kind, commanding respect without harshness. Clara marveled at the balance he carried between authority and gentleness, and felt herself drawn to it in ways she could not yet name. Talon led her to a horse that had been recently treated for a minor injury and knelt beside it to check the bandages. Clara hesitated nearby, unsure how to help, but he motioned for her to come closer. She stepped forward cautiously and extended her hand toward the animal, just as he had guided her the morning before. He remained beside her, not touching her, just watching patiently and giving her space to learn. When her hand brushed the horse's coat, Talon's eyes met hers, and for a moment she felt the same quiet warmth she had felt during the first ride. There was no pressure, no expectation, only presence and patience. As they worked together, Talon's hand brushed hers lightly by accident, and Clara froze a moment, feeling a spark of sensation she had never experienced before. He did not pull away, nor did he comment. Instead, he continued his work with the same calm steadiness. The brief touch lingered in her mind and in her chest, leaving a flutter of awareness that seemed to pulse with possibility. Clara realized that this was different from the touch of strangers or authority figures. It carried no demand, only the subtle assertion of companionship and shared effort. After finishing with the horse, Talon rose and stood beside her, the morning sun catching his profile in a way that made him seem larger than life, yet entirely human at once. He spoke softly, telling her she was learning quickly that her care for the animals was genuine and that her hands carried the gentleness necessary to gain trust. Clara felt warmth flood her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from a growing sense of pride and acceptance. She realized she was beginning to belong, not because she had to, but because she chose to be present in this world. He was showing her. They spent the afternoon exploring the barns and surrounding fields, moving slowly and deliberately, letting Clara adjust to the vastness of the land and the rhythm of the ranch. Talon never forced her to keep pace nor to act beyond her comfort. Each step and each gesture carried the quiet lesson of trust and shared understanding. Clara began to notice the small ways he paid attention to her expressions, her hesitations, and her growing confidence. Each acknowledgement built a thread of connection between them, fragile yet undeniable. As evening approached, they returned to the main house, and Clara found herself lingering at the doorway, watching Talon tend to the horses one last time. She stepped closer, and he did not turn immediately, letting her presence exist beside him. When he finally looked at her, his eyes held the warmth of recognition and acceptance. Clara felt her chest lift slightly, and for the first time she moved without fear toward him and into a small embrace, not forced, not demanded, but given freely between two people beginning to understand one another. By the time they entered the house together, the shadows were long and soft, and Clara felt something shift within her. The first real touch had passed between them, a touch that spoke not of obligation or expectation, but of partnership and care. She realized that this day marked a turning point, a step away from fear and toward something new, fragile, and exhilarating, yet entirely real. In that quiet evening light, she felt, for the first time, the possibility that she could love and be loved by the man who had chosen to wait and to meet her, not with demand but with patience. The sun had dipped below the hills, and the ranch was bathed in the soft glow of twilight as Clara prepared for the evening. The fire in the hearth cast dancing shadows across the room, and the faint smell of cooked vegetables and fresh bread lingered in the air. Clara moved slowly, arranging the small items she had brought from her room, her heart still fluttering from the events of the day. She realized that the first ride and the shared work in the barns had shifted something inside her. The fear that had weighed heavily on her chest was not gone entirely, but it had softened and left space for curiosity and cautious trust. Talon entered quietly, carrying a small lantern, its warm light illuminating his strong features. He did not speak immediately, but simply observed her with a gentle patience that made her chest tighten with a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. Clara felt a nervous flutter as she met his gaze for the first time in the evening, without the bright sunlight to mask her vulnerability. He offered a faint smile and gestured for her to sit on the edge of the chair near the fire. She did so slowly, keeping her hands folded in her lap, unsure of what to expect. Instead of stepping closer immediately, Talon remained near the doorway, letting the silence stretch between them. Clara realized that the deliberate space he offered was part of the trust he had promised to build. She swallowed hard and finally found the courage to speak. She admitted that she no longer wanted separate rooms, that she wanted to be near him and to share the evening without fear. Her voice shook yet carried determination and honesty that surprised even her. Talon's eyes softened and he nodded as if he had been waiting for this moment. He stepped closer now, moving slowly, allowing Clara to adjust to his proximity. His presence was steady and reassuring, yet he did not claim or force anything. Clara felt the warmth of his body near hers without pressure, the quiet strength of his touch without demand. She realized that for the first time since the wedding she could breathe freely, and that her heart could guide the closeness between them rather than fear. Talon extended his hand gently, and she took it without hesitation, feeling the solid warmth and careful patience that had defined him from the beginning. As the evening progressed, Talon remained attentive to her cues, never rushing, never demanding, always watching for comfort and consent. Clara guided the interactions, allowing herself to lean into him when she felt safe to do so. The trust she had built over the days and through the first ride and the work in the barns had created a fragile yet undeniable bond. She felt her chest lift as the tight knot of fear loosened, completely leaving space for connection and tentative affection. When they finally settled beside the fire, Clara rested her head lightly against Talon's shoulder and felt a profound sense of safety she had never experienced before. The heat of the flames mixed with the warmth of his presence, creating a cocoon of comfort and quiet intimacy. She realized that she had cried her last tears of fear for tonight. The tears that had fallen on the wedding night were replaced with a quiet gratitude, a sense of belonging, and a spark of anticipation for what could come. Talon spoke softly in the hush of the room, reminding her that trust is built slowly, that love is earned, and that he would spend every day proving her worthiness of his care and attention. Clara listened, feeling the weight of his words settle into her chest like a protective promise. She realized that the night had shifted completely from one of dread to one of hope and possibility. Her fears were not dismissed but transformed into understanding and gentle guidance. By the time sleep approached, the fire was reduced to glowing embers and the ranch lay quiet outside. Clara remained in Talon's arms, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her cheek. She no longer felt trapped nor afraid. Instead, she felt a fragile yet certain connection with a man who had chosen patience over force and respect over demand. The night she had feared became the night she did not cry. The night she felt the first true security and the first step toward love born not from obligation but from trust and shared understanding. The first light of dawn spilled across the chaos. Greyhawk Ranch painting the fields in gold and soft pinks. Clara stirred beneath the warmth of the quilt, feeling the steady presence of Talon beside her. The events of the past days rushed through her mind, the tears of the wedding night, the ride across the fields, the storm in the cabin, and the moments of trust that had grown slowly between them. She realized with a mixture of awe and relief that she had crossed an invisible threshold. From fear to acceptance, from hesitation to courage. The sunrise seemed to celebrate the quiet transformation within her as the land itself stretched and yawned in the early light. Talon remained still beside her, his hand lightly resting near hers. He did not speak immediately, allowing the moment to linger, a silent acknowledgement of what had passed and what was possible. Clara turned to look at him, his face calm, strong, and yet softened by the gentleness he had shown since the beginning of their marriage. For the first time, she saw him not only as her husband, but as a man who had chosen her freely, a man whose patience and care had earned her trust, and whose steady presence had reshaped her own heart. She rose slowly and moved to the window, stepping out onto the porch, feeling the chill of the morning air against her skin. The land stretched endlessly before her, with rolling hills dotted with horses grazing in the distance, and the soft flicker of sunlight reflecting off the streams that carved paths through the ranch. Clara felt a sense of freedom and belonging she had never known before, a realization that she had become part of this world, not through obligation but through her own choice to embrace it. And the man who had guided her gently into it, Talon, joined her, quietly standing beside her, watching the sunrise, with a shared understanding that needed no words. He spoke softly, telling her that from this moment forward she would be safe, that he would spend every day earning her trust and showing her that she was his partner in life, not merely by title, but by devotion. Clara felt the warmth of his voice seep into her chest, a grounding presence that eased the last remnants of doubt and fear. The sincerity in his eyes reflected the promise he carried and the devotion he had shown, through patience and care rather than force. As the sun climbed higher over the hills, Talon reached for her hand, and Clara did not hesitate to take it. The touch was simple yet profound, a connection built on days of shared moments, trust, and mutual respect. She felt the pulse of his strength and steadiness through his hand, the silent assurance that she belonged beside him, not as a captive or obligation, but as a woman who had been chosen and cherished. In that single gesture, the weight of her past fear lifted completely, leaving space only for belonging, love, and hope. They turned their gaze together toward the horizon, watching the golden light sweep across the fields and hills. The horses stirred in the distance, and the wind carried the scent of wet grass and earth. Clara realized that this sunrise marked more than the beginning of a day. It marked the beginning of a life they would build together, a life rooted in trust, patience, and shared understanding. She felt a deep sense of gratitude that the man who had once seemed so distant had chosen to meet her heart with gentleness and care. When Talon whispered her name softly, she leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body and the quiet reassurance of his presence. She had cried on her wedding night out of fear and uncertainty, yet here at sunrise she felt complete, a fragile yet unwavering certainty that she had found her place beside him. He had made her his forever, not through obligation or demand, but through patience, understanding, and the quiet power of love born from respect. Clara smiled for the first time without hesitation, feeling the sunrise wrap around them and knowing that she had truly become his, not only in title, but in heart and soul. The ranch lay quiet around them, the wind whispering through the fields and the sun rising steadily higher. Together they faced the day and the promise of a shared life built slowly, gently, and fully. At last she understood that love had not been rushed or forced, but earned and given freely, and in that knowledge she felt unshakable, certain, and entirely whole.